Duff by Gary Wood, otherwise known as Dress Up Friday. At work on a Friday before lockdown we had a Dress Down Friday, i.e. we gave £1 for the company supported charity. We could then wear what we wanted, long as it was non-business oriented, jeans and a t-shirt type. Well, since lockdown, some bright spark decided we should do a dress up to some theme instead and submit an image of ourselves working, so we have had creative, sun, sea, sand, 70s disco, favourite sport, and last week was film characters, so I chose Long John Silver. Church in Lockdown by Steve Beckson. None of your suggestions happening in my area were worth photographing, so I had a walk round and looked for lockdown locks. ESCC Live by Daniel Wood. This is the studio where I've been spending my Wednesday evenings preparing your live videos. Going Nowhere in Lockdown by Margaret Waterson. We were out walking when I spotted this one along the canal. I didn't have my camera, so I used my phone. I haven't done much to the photo, it's more or less as I took it. Handmade VE Day Decorations by Margaret Waterson. Again taken on my phone. The decoration I made for VE Day looked nice when laid out in a pattern. This photo I took today. I used Photoshops to crop them and resize. Ignoring Staying at Home by Chantel Cooper. M69 in Lockdown by Paul Steens. Making Scrubs by Steve Pears. Mowing by Daniel Wood. My Turn to Shine by Alan Wardroper. Park in Lockdown by Steve Beckson. Another Lockdown Lock. Queuing to Shop by Chantel Cooper. Social Distancing by Loz Waterson. Socially Distanced Queuing by Andy Freeman. Some Party by Alan Cook. The Centre of Attention by Alan Wardroper. My images were taken during our Streets VE celebrations. One of the residents is a professional singer, Sam Southall. He set up some speakers in his front lawn and invited people to join in. He sang for about 2 hours, interspersed with sessions from one of the neighbours, Norman, who is a saxophone player, and Lauren, who can really handle a hula hoop. We all came out again at 9 p.m. and sang We'll Meet Again, and he did a few more songs. A great time was had by all. The Isolation Blues by Peter Lawrence. Inspired by my desk and what I spend a great deal of my time staring at, including writing music for a couple of recent ESCC competitions. The Last Post VE Day by Peter Lawrence. The last post was played by my neighbour on his drive on VE Day. He played either side with a 2-minute silence. It was very strange as there were only a few people outside their homes, but it was very moving because it was so quiet. Tunnel Vision by Gary Wood. For my exercise, I've been walking from Broughton Astley to Ellersthorpe or Ellersthorpe to Broughton Astley, normally with the dog, along the old disused original Leicester to London main line via Rugby. The other day the wind had blown and there was a lot of blossom lying around. I took the image on my phone as that's all I had available, and then in Photoshop I duplicated the layer. I applied a rotation motion blur and then used a mask to bring back the path from the background layer. VE Day with the Queen on Zoom by John Smith. I was thinking about the words Zoom, Lockdown and VE Day. Was suddenly inspired by the Queen's VE 75 speech, so we got it back on playback. Unfortunately, there was a lady doing sign language, so not to let this worry me, I decided to carry on with her in the picture. We sat in front of the TV with our feet on a footstool and took the shot handheld. I also took a selfie and brought it all together on Elements. I had downloaded an image of the Zoom taskbar. I took my own image and moved it into the bottom of the TV screen and resized. This covered the bottom of the lady doing sign language. I then drew a black rectangle around her. Finally, I took the image of the Zoom taskbar and carefully placed on the bottom of the TV screen. The original image on the TV and our feet were taken at f5 1/40th of a second ISO 400. VE Day by The Future by Roger Leck. VE Day The Future, taken from my Canon 128mm 1/200th a second at f6.3 ISO 100. The boy was lightened on Lightroom with the background darkened. Walking Through the Golf Course by Steve Pearce. Walled In by Roger Leck. Taken in my lounge with my iPad using the Photo Booth app. Exposure 1/50th second at f24. Focal length 3.3mm ISO 32. Where's All the Traffic Gone by Loz Waterson. Virtually in the Office by Gary Wood. From the same week as the Dress Up Friday Duff image, I initially couldn't find a parrot for the pirate, so decided I would be Rodney Skinner from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I took one image of me not in the shot and one image me in the shot, and then used mask layer to superimpose and transparency to lighten. Keep Reading and Carry On by John Smith. I enjoy reading, and at the moment I am doing a load more. I thought, how can I reflect this in my image? So I placed several books at an angle on top of a sideboard. I then took a book, opened it and placed my specs on top. I utilised the lamp at the side of the sideboard by switching it on to give some highlights and shadows. Use the tripod, f8, 1/60th a second, ISO 400, just minor adjustments in Lightrooms. Forever Washing Hands by Wendy Cook. A Glimmer of Light by Alan Cook. A good attempt at making a creative image. Unfortunately, the white areas to the left are too bright. Scores 12. An Intimate Portrait by Al Sims. The double lines down her arms affect the picture, otherwise another photographer trying to create something different. Scored 14. Apple Blossoms by Paul Steems. Perhaps a little too much in the picture. Try and simplify by choosing less complicated flower buds. Scored 13. This was taken for one of the rounds for just for fun, but wasn't used. Cropping and dodging and burning were done using Affinity. I also adjusted the colours. Battling On by Peter Lawrence. A good canoeing shot. Looks like the photographer has flipped the image as the name on the helmet looks back to front. Scored 16. Taken at home Pearpoint last September at the National Whitewater Championship on a Nikon D850 with a 70 to 200mm lens, 1/5000th of a second at f2.8. Very high speed to freeze extremely quick movement. The challenges were to avoid the far bank and to try and make it appear contestants were not blinded by the sun. See the original image. Bee-Fly by Chantel Cooper. It's unfortunate that there is a little area to the back of the bee that pulls the eye to that area. Scored 16. Was feeding or pollinating our beautiful purple flowering bush. No idea what it is. So again, with my 100-400 lens and camera set at fast speed, I managed to capture this after many failed attempts. Again, large crop and denoise. Carrade by Al Sims. Welsh for love, and I just loved the tension in her expression. I would have created the picture around that face. See my version. Scored 16. Again, taken indoors at the Solo Studios in Wigston, at the same shoot, obviously, because it's the same girl. Again cropped, converted to black and white, tones and shading adjusted. Catch Me If You Can by Peter Lawrence. The picture is in the bottom half of the shot. I don't think you need the sky. See modified version. Scored 13. Taken on the South Bank in London in March, week before lockdown this year. My Nikon Z6 24-70 zoom. 1600ths of a second at f5. High speed, trying to freeze jumping. Very crowded area and had to remove some people to the left of the screen and crop a great deal from right. Also required straightening. Original image shown. Shortly after this, dropped the Z6, broke the camera and lens in Science Museum and started lengthy insurance wrangle. Chile at Sutton Cheney by Rob Jones. This picture doesn't work in its present form. I think it is better as a monochrome. See my version. Scored 15. Concentration by Paul Steens. Very well captured image under difficult lighting conditions. Good composition. Scored 16. This was taken in a hairdresser's salon in Hinckley. I knew the owner Joe and went along one day and asked if I could take some photos. Luckily he had this client and they both gave me the okay. Originally I was thinking of using it for one of my images for the industry theme, but then changed my mind. Taken using the available light in the saloon plus daylight, cropping and dodging and burning was done using Affinity. Contemplation by Daniel Wood. I feel that the street art actually overpowers the girl. You need to make the girl a little brighter to dominate the picture. Scored 15. Daffer Wagon by Roger Leck. Conditions are a little too bright for this subject matter. Scored 13. Disappearing by Paul Steens. This is a scene that I know very well. I have taken many pictures in this location. This picture looks too grey. I have tried to inject a little more drama into the shot. See my version. Scored 13. I waited for quite a while on the bridge into Selfridges to get just one person in the distance. I liked the curvature of the bridge with the strong lines of the structure leading towards the person. I converted it to black and white and dodged and burned within Affinity. Eagle by Chantel Cooper. A very good portrait of this bird. Scored 15. This was taken last year at a bird of prey centre in the Cotswolds. It was sitting on a perch against a dark background, so I made it darker and cropped it in close. I also did some dodging and burning. Electric Power by Steve Bexon. Another location that I have seen before in exhibitions. This image needs a little more contrast. See my version. Scored 17. After seeing a similar picture a number of years ago, I managed with the help of Google Maps to find a possible viewpoint. On my next trip to London I checked it out and found a narrow footpath on the edge of Chelsea, which seemed a good spot. Although not too safe on my own at dusk with groups of undesirables checking me out, I balanced my camera on a fence and took a few long exposures of the scene. Because my camera had very little stability on the fence, most shots were blurred, but I did manage to get a couple I was happy with. So immediately got out of the area and back onto the nearest tube station. Basic edits in Lightroom to correct white balance and colour tones. Eyes to the Left by Daniel Wood. This is similar to the picture we saw earlier. The background is again too prominent. Scored 13. First Steps by John Denny. Somehow the squirrels get lost in the picture area. Scored 12. Taking during lockdown's daily walking exercises in Sheepy Woods, next to the Common and Burbage Wood. The squirrel's nest, or dray, was spotted whilst waiting back 2 metres for some people to pass. I took quite a few pictures over a series of days, but really were all 3 babies or kittens together. This image just had some work on the shadows and levels to give it better definition, especially in the sky. It was then cropped, all in Lightrooms. Taken on the 22nd of April. On a Nikon D750, shutter priority 1/400th of a second, f7.1, ISO 320, on a Nikon 70-300mm lens at 300mm. Fisticuffs by Peter Lawrence. The boxes are too low in the bottom left of the frame. Another picture that needs more work doing to it to enhance the tones, scored 13. Taken at the 1940s weekend at Quorn on the Great Central Railway. Again on a Nikon D850 with a 24-120 lens at 1/500th of a second at f5, exposure biased. Incredibly bright day, problem was avoiding glare. Finding an angle that omitted present day features and other visitors. Although cut off to the left and lighter, I thought this led through the picture, through the action of the gloves and faces up to the right near corner and the guy watching. Floating by Alan Wardroper. The shape of the girl and especially the hands work perfectly, scored 17. The model was lit using a single overhead softbox. She was positioned so her front was lit. The flash was metered and then the f-stop moved up 1 to make the image darker and softer. Follow Me by Steve Pearce. Because of the severe lighting conditions, this factor affects the overall picture. I have tried to take out some of the harsh tones. See my version, scored 13. Giant by Debbie Lowe. I don't feel that single images of elephants work. A herd would make a better picture, scored 14. Harbour Reflections by John Smith. I find the green area at the bottom of the image distracting, scored 12. Isolated by Alan Cook. Birds on feeders do not work as well as if they were at a tree hole nest site, scored 13. Moon by Rob Jones. An excellent picture of the moon, not strong enough for a high score, 15. Morning Under Vienna by Roger Leck. A very well composed image. However, I just feel that there is too much space at the bottom, so living up to my name of Chopper Gennard, I would cut the bottom off up to the main red area. My version, scored 16. Not the Hogwarts Express by Gary Wood. I just like the conditions, perhaps a little too much at the top of the picture, scored 15. Scary by Ian Waite. Far too oversaturated, scores 12. Sea Plane Sundown by Andy Freeman. The plane is too far to the left of the frame, but good use of the nighttime conditions, scored 13. My POTY image was taken on a night shoot at the RAF Museum at Cosford in mid-March, just before the lockdown started. The aircraft in the shot is a Catling seaplane from the Second World War period. This image was taken after the sun had gone down, but facing west, hence the glow in the sky. Shot was taken on a Nikon D3-100 using an 18-105 zoom, 18mm f4, 100 ISO, 30-second exposure. Lighting was provided by the organisers using fairly dim spotlights 30 yards to the right of the plane. Serenity by John Smith. A very simple composition, but too bright at the bottom of the picture, scored 15. Shh by Debbie Lowe. Good use of dramatic lighting, scored 16. St Peter's Witherley by Gary Wood. Another picture where I find the sky is too bright, scored 13. Sunset over Benidorm by Roger Leck. Good sunset. The land starts to get too dark at the right of the frame, scored 13. Taralanga Beach by Julie Hall-Beshmond. I feel that there is too much at the bottom of the picture and perhaps a little too oversaturated. See my version, scored 17. Taken whilst on holiday in New Zealand in February. We got to the beach for about 8 PM, just as people were leaving. The sight was not what we had expected at all. We wanted sunset images and the sky was not vibrant to start with. We walked around for a while and found a couple of locations with foreground interest, and I started to take some images using a tripod. Then by magic the lighting changed so I changed the settings to 24mm focal length, f16, ISO 100 at 20 seconds with a 6-stop filter. I wanted to get the water to be still. The Flower Girl by Alan Wardroper. I admire photographers who try something different. This one works except for the arms. I would cut out the arms and make it a square picture. See my version, scored 16. The model was in a child's swimming pool in a milk and water mix. I was standing in the water to get the overhead shot. The biggest problem was dealing with the reflections and cold water, which also accounts for the model's wide-eyed look. She did really well to get through the shoot without getting hypothermia. Took out the remaining reflections in Photoshop, taking on an 1855 lens, 1/180th of a second f9 ISO 100. The Open Door by Steve Bexon. A very well captured image. I would take some off the top, scored 15. At the start of the lockdown, I decided to edit some images taken last year. This resulted in a composite image of a picture I had taken of some phone boxes near Covent Garden, of which I added a girl photographed with her father in Camden Town, plus a red balloon blown up and photographed tied to my garden fence. I liked the resulting matching reds and a focal point given by the girl and the balloon leading to the open door. I added a small amount of bleach bypass with Nick colour effects to age the picture slightly. The Preacher by Steve Pearce. Good use of the space in the picture, contrast is well controlled, scored 14. The View from Beacon Hill by John Smith. The photographer has recorded the mood very well, not quite strong enough to get into the high scores, scored 15. Thinking About It by Alan Wardroper. I feel the other picture of this girl is stronger. Her right arm needs to be put onto the side of the chair, scored 14. Taken on the same photo shoot as Floating, again with the 18 to 200mm lens at 1/125th of a second f13 ISO 100, and I did miss that I printed them both on matte paper, so again added to the softer look. Underneath the Arches by Ian Waite. The bright light coming from behind the girl is distracting, scored 13. Waiting for Sunset by Steve Pearce. The person in the picture doesn't suit the picture. A person from the region on a camel may be more fitting, scored 13. Walk On By Ian Waite. A good example of street photography. Blurred images complement the picture, scored 17. My street image, Walk On By, was planned in advance, having seen similar in a magazine. I was in Gallery Gate and shot with the camera at waist height using the flip out screen to be unobtrusive. I used the shutter speed of 1/6 of a second to emphasise that people were walking by and ignoring him, whilst attempting to keep the camera still so the subject remained sharp. What Are You Looking At by John Denny. I like the way the photographer has blurred the background. Not strong enough to get into the high scores, scored 13. Taken at Brodick Ferry terminal whilst waiting for the ferry back to the mainland from Arran. I was taking photos of both this heron and an otter swimming around below it. For a brief moment the heron looked directly at me, resulting in the beak becoming invisible. The image was first cleaned up and cropped in Lightrooms, then loaded into Photoshop. Once in Photoshop, to emphasise the bird more, I created a new layer containing just the heron. I then duplicated the background layer and set the blend mode to multiply, adding a gradient mask making the background darker to the bottom, lighter at the top to give a sense of depth. The heron layer was then brought to the top. It was taken September last year on a Nikon D750, shutter priority 1/500th of a second, f5.3 ISO 1000, using a Nikon 70 to 300mm lens at 220mm. Woodland by James Bottrell. Good mood in this picture, but the rays of light look too dramatic, scored 14. Wren by Chantal Cooper. The wren looks too big in the frame, scored 13. Was taken in my garden. Now that I have more time to sit outside, it has always been on my bucket list to capture a wren. This was taken with my Canon 100-400mm lens. Small amount of editing in Photoshop to remove a couple of branches, otherwise just cropped and denoised. Ivory Flame by Phil Mallon. Holly has been photographed very well indeed. The motion and softness suits the overall image. I just think she is a little too far to the right. Cut a little off the left and recenter her. See my version. Scored 18. This image was taken using natural light, set against a plain plastered wall. The model is wearing one of Julie's headdresses and feathered skirts. The idea was to produce an image that looked light and flowing with pastel colours. Taken on a Canon 5D Mark IV, 24mm f9 1/125th of a second using manual exposure. Saltwick Wreck by Julie Holbechmond. Another good seascape picture. A little more separation between the wreck and the rocks in the background would have helped the composition. Also, I don't like the magenta cast. See my version. Scored 18. We went to Whitby for the weekend. Travelled to Robin Hood Bay late in the afternoon to find out that the wreck was a good walk away and the tide was coming in. With wellies and a Canon 5D Mark IV, we started walking on very wet black rocks. Whilst climbing over some rocks, I slipped and fell badly and got wet, but that did not stop us. We still got to the wreck. I set up the tripod and camera with a 17-40mm lens and took some images. After looking at several compositions, the settings were 19mm, focal length f11, 1/50th at ISO 200. The way back was tricky. The tide had come in quite a bit and I was concerned that we would get stuck. However, we got home and then I realised how badly I had damaged my knee. I could not walk very well and was bruised. Tahuhu Rock by Phil Mallon. A wonderful composition and conditions. I like the low viewpoint taken by the photographer. Scored 18. Taken while on holiday in New Zealand at Cathedral Cove, North Island. We walked for 1.5 hours in the pitch dark with just head torches to guide us to get to this place before the sun came up. We had no idea if the sunrise was going to be worth it. We arrived about half an hour before the sun began to colour up. We wanted to be the first photographers there. It is very popular. Needless to say, we stayed there for about 2 hours and many a shot was taken. Taken on a Canon 5D Mark IV, 17mm f14, 13-second exposure, ISO 800 manual things with a 6-stop filter and graduated neutral density filter. Fun in the Township by Debbie Lowe. The photographer has caught the action in this picture perfectly. The vitality of the children has been recorded very well. I will have made the picture to look more dramatic. See my version. Scored 19. Herring Fleet by James Bottrell. My favourite picture in the competition. Herring Fleet Smock Mill near St Olave's on the Norfolk-Suffolk border. It's looking slightly dilapidated these days with only 2 sails remaining. The image is well composed, the mill is well positioned. There is nice lead-in and good reflection. The photographer has captured the mood of the landscape very well. Scored 20.